Welcome to the Hospitality Talks. This is Sam-Erik, Ruttmann, and my partner in crime, Abid. Hello, Abid. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Sam. Sam, I hope you're enjoying the summer in Helsinki.
Yes, I love it. It's 20 degrees plus, so I don't have to wear a sweater at the moment, so I'm quite okay. But I understand that our guest want to be in Southern California one of these days, so I think you should bring him on board so we can have a interesting discussion about what's happening in the hospitality industry here in US.
Absolutely. For now, we'll have to send him virtually to Southern California unless he travels there and hope that the travel comes back. So without any further ado, let me bring in Jon Bortz, who is the chairman and CEO of Pebblebrook Hotel Trust. Jon, welcome to Hospitality Talks.
Thanks, Abid. Nice to be here.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. We were just before we went on the air, Sam and I were talking about the weather in Helsinki and how warm at time it can get. He just doesn't know what DC weather can be.
Yeah, it's rather disgusting here this time of year. Upper 90s, 100 degrees, and lots of humidity. It's delightful.
Well, Jon, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you've been involved in the industry for a long time, and also now as a chair for the AHLA, you get the wider view of the industry. So if you don't mind, I'm going to get into it. Just from Pebblebrook point of view, walk us through the last couple of years, particularly your merger with Lasalles. How has that gone? Has it been successful? Have you gotten the results that you and your stakeholders were looking for?
Sure. So we closed what was a little over a $5 billion acquisition of Lasalles at the end of November of 2018. We were 28 properties. They were 41. They were a little larger than we were. We brought over the whole team other than the senior management, which was duplicative, and integrated the two organizations. In fact, moved into joint space last September of 2019. And it's gone really well. We've kept everybody on the team here. So we integrated really well. We had, I think, something like $18 million of G&A savings out of the transaction. We took, if you recall, we paid about 30% in cash. The rest was stock. And what we did was we then, that 1.7 billion of cash that we borrowed to do the transaction, we basically went out and sold assets out of the portfolio that we weren't all that interested in the long term. And so over the course of the following 16 months or so, we sold $1.7 billion of assets. And we sold them generally at about 5 to 10% higher than the price that we paid in total. So that part of it worked out well. The synergies worked out well. And then there's been a group of benefits that we've been working hard on over the last 18 months or so, which we call portfolio-wide initiatives. But basically it was, how do we lower costs through the portfolio by taking advantage of the economies of scale of now being the largest lifestyle independent owner of hotels and resorts in the United States. And over the course of that period up until the pandemic hit, we had achieved about $10 million of annualized run rate savings out of the portfolio. So you put a 15 multiple on that, that's another $150 million of value creation. So it's gone very well. Of course, we hit the pandemic. The stock market, for whatever reason, doesn't like businesses that go from $1.6 billion in revenues down to $100 million in annualized revenues. And so, of course, the stock hasn't performed particularly well, as has been the case with pretty much any travel company these days.
You know, that is obviously when the revenues go down that far, stock is going to respond. But generally speaking, even C corps or REITs, C corps are down around 37 to 40%, and REITs are down about 49%. And it's temporary, but this is possibly the worst decline that we have seen. Do you see that coming back anytime soon? What is the future look like from your lens?
It's interesting because, well, you mentioned it in the intro. I've been around a little bit, which just means I'm old at this point. But having gone through 9/11 and then the great financial recession, we go back to 2009. We were talking about San Diego. I remember being at a NAREIT meeting or was it maybe it was Alice was meeting in San Diego, and there were 5 stocks at lodging REITs that were $1 or less, and then there was a whole group, including Lasalles, where I was at the time, that got down to about $5 a share from a high of $50. And guess what? We came back, and we're a cyclical business. I think the great thing about travel is it's in a secular positive trend. People want to experience travel, whether it's for business or for leisure, and it tends to come back every time. And as a result of that, we've always said, don't have too much leverage in a highly cyclical business, because we have a lot of operating leverage to start with, and have a lot of liquidity, which is the real key in this downturn. Is when you get into a situation, as you know, where basically there's almost no occupancy, or you close. We closed 46 out of 54 hotels in March. Well, you have a cash burn, right? There's expenses that don't go away. Well, how do you pay for it? It's with liquidity. And one of the benefits out of the LaSalle combination was we were a larger company with a bigger balance sheet, and we increased our credit facility up to $650 million, and it was all available when this hit, and we drew it all down. And unfortunately, we're going to burn through probably half of that, depending upon how long this plays out over this period of time. So being public and being a part of that has been a real key part of being able to get through this. But we do think it'll come back. The 400 million of cash burn is not the end of the world, but it's about $3 a share potentially at the high end. So 10% of the value of the company, we like to say, poof, just disappears in the pandemic.
Jon, if we were to ask the magic mirror on the wall, who is in it for the long haul? What do you think? What kind of hotels, what kind of organizations would come out? Might it be that we come out a bit battered and bruised as the industry, but what types of hotels are at highest risk?
Well, the highest risk are probably older properties in some of the major markets or in some of the suburban markets where there's significant capital that needs to go in to maintain competitiveness. And I think those properties will unfortunately probably suffer from being starved over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And those properties, and we've seen this in prior cycles, some of those properties they don't reopen in this case, or maybe they become housing, residential, they get converted, or they even get torn down and get replaced by a new product. So I think it has more to do with age than it does to do with type of assets at the end of the day.
So in some ways, the old stock that might be functionally obsolete, if that goes out, that's not necessarily a bad thing for the industry, because consumer expectations are very, very high at this point. So I guess that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'll turn it over to Sam in a second, Jon, but with the merger of LaSalle and Pebblebrook, did you obviously have a much wider footprint across the country? Are there certain metro areas that have performed better during this pandemic, certain markets that show better promise than the others?
Well, I think for sure, because this is what we've seen come back as primarily leisure business at this point. And so the properties that have benefited have been our leisure properties. We have eight resorts. They're all drive to. They're all within an hour. I guess Key West, maybe 2.5 hours of a major metro area, and all of them have seen a very significant recovery in their leisure business. In fact, most of our resorts are running at higher average rates than they were last year, primarily because the mix has changed and we don't have that international discount business. We don't have that wholesale business. We don't have group that generally prices below transient at our resorts. And so from a rate perspective, it's more attractive. In our urban markets, I'd say it's the ones with better weather that are more attractive from a leisure perspective. So we were talking about San Diego earlier. All of our properties in San Diego, we have 7 down there, between 4 downtown and 3 out, 2 in Mission Bay and 1 in Del Mar. They're all reopened and they're all doing better than our other markets. We like to say it's the weather stupid. People will drive from, Arizona or Las Vegas or Orange County or LA when it's hot and go down to San Diego where it's 72 degrees all the time and take advantage of that cooler atmosphere and the beautiful nature of San Diego at the end of the day. Miami and Key West, kind of similar. People want to go down there. It's better weather on average, and there are more things to do from a leisure perspective. So right now it's the leisure-dominated businesses, but that'll change over time as business begins to travel again. And I think all this chatter about businesses not traveling again because everything can be done through Skype or Zoom or Microsoft Teams, those of us who've lived through these cycles, we hear this every time. And maybe it's different, but I think human beings are social animals. They want to get together, and it's beneficial to get together. It's far better from a business perspective to develop a relationship in person and grow that relationship in person than it is somehow on digital media.
Well, there is no doubt about it, and I think it's innate in our DNAs that we do want to be with others and be able to socialize. So also globally, even during the depth of financial crisis, tourism grew double digits. So I'm sure it'll come back. It's just a matter of what the visibility is. Let me turn it over to Sam here for a second, and I'll come right back to you. Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Abid. John, great to have you on this show with us. And I'm very interested about the time because the pandemic is, of course, it's for everyone it's the same around the world, the pandemic. And certain companies and hotels and industries are able to deal with it better than others. But through this time, you have gone through a lot of sacrifice, whether it's operational or on the positive side, you look at better efficiency. Could you just share some of your thoughts what went through for yourself and your team in March when you start to feel that, hey, things have changed dramatically?
Well, I remember we had a strategic meeting at my house, about 20 of our senior leaders on March 6th. And one of the things we talked about was we're going to have to close our hotels. And there isn't going to be any travel. And I remember this more vividly for 9/11 when those planes crashed into the towers. And I was actually on a golfing trip in Las Vegas and caught it on the news when I woke up. And I made a call to our COO and I said, the world's going to be different for a while. Circle the wagons. We're going to have to protect the assets. People aren't going to travel for some period of time. They're going to be too scared. And basically we went through the sort of the same playbook, which is it starts as purely defensive, right? How do you mitigate the negative impact? Protect your assets, and the most dire asset is cash and liquidity. So how do you do that? Eliminate your losses or mitigate your losses as quickly as you can, understanding what was happening, not saying we're going to wait and see how it plays out, which is what a lot of our operators wanted to do. We really had to pull them forward to say, look, we might be a few weeks ahead of you, but we've seen this before. And so we need to close. And we closed 46 hotels within about 10 days within our portfolio. You've never done that. It's a new thing, but it's communication with the team. It's I wrote a letter out to all the GMs. We did a Zoom call, like a town hall with folks, and explaining to them we're going to have to make some really hard decisions, but the quicker we make them, the quicker and better we're going to be able to be as we come out of this through the cycle. The quicker we can hire people back if we save our resources now for when demand comes back, because we need to be around when demand comes back. So it's a lot of communication with the team. It's a lot of hand-holding. It's explaining what the playbook is. It's telling people what we know and what we don't know at the end of the day. But in many cases, it really was pulling people forward, helping them understand why this was going to be different and why we needed to do what we did. And if we did it, we'd be fine. We would get through this at the end of the day. So that it's sort of if you go back to, I remember the Iraq bombing, this whole idea of shock and awe. We were all kind of in shock, right? I mean, this was unprecedented, closing hotels. And so you have to understand how people are going to react emotionally to it. I mean, one, they're going to have to close the hotel. Two, we got to furlough almost the entire staff. This is emotionally challenging for a team. I mean, you think about the hospitality business, and it's a team effort, and we are all in it together to serve our customers. And how do we make this drastic change, drive off the road, a road we've never been on, and make these changes? And so emotionally it's difficult, but unfortunately the benefit of having gone through crises before is you learn how to manage during crises, and you understand what's important. And it really was about saying, look, we've done this before. Here's the plan, and it'll work.
Yeah, I went through one of those things also in 2004 while I was on Phuket Island, and also a number of viruses that came out of China that affected our business also to Thailand. And one of the things is that we had to do was, it was quite a bit of, it was a sacrifice in one way that pay cuts in order to keep jobs. Top management, they don't get a salary for a while, and all those things. Are you going through the similar approach to these things, that where they say that the top management also are sacrificing their financial in order to keep everybody else working, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, we did that in March. I mean, we did that immediately. I went to the board and said, I want to give up my salary for the rest of the year. Our top management wants to give up 30% of their salary. And I asked the board, what are you willing to do? And they said, we'll give up the same thing as senior management. We'll give up 30%. Our senior team here, the next level down, I asked them, what are you willing to give up? Here we are, we're going to ask these people, we're going to furlough a lot of people. Some of those people probably will never come back. The other people, the senior people, we're going to ask to take a 20% pay cut at the end of the day for some period of time. What are you willing to do? And they said, look, we'll take a 20% pay cut for the rest of the year. We don't know how long this thing's going to last. But I think even next year, there's probably a readjustment. I mean, our company's it's not as valuable as it was before. We'll hopefully get back there in a few years, but I don't deserve to make the same amount of money as I did before when things are good. And we did other things. We said, look, we gave up $15 million of retention grants that have been granted in February before this really happened. And we said, look, it's not the right time to do this. And by the way, we don't need to worry about retention right now. There's no place for anybody to go. So yes, you lead by example at the end of the day, right? I mean, how do you expect people to follow you up the hill to get shot and maybe killed if you're not willing to lead them up the hill at the end of the day?
Yeah. By the way, we have one viewer, Kevin Sanders, just saying, great insight from Jon. Thank you very much. So greatly appreciated your input here.
Sure.
Well, looking forward now, you have hotels already in operation, I assume?
Yeah, we're back to 23, 25 of our hotels are open, I believe, out of 54 right now. We're gradually, all of our resorts are open, been open since the end of June, and we're gradually reopening properties in the urban markets as those cities reopen, those states reopen, and as we begin to see enough demand come back so that, our criteria is pretty simple. We're only going to open if we lose less money open than staying closed. And the biggest challenge is, of course, demand is really, if you have open hotels today, demand is incredibly short term. I mean, in the week, for the week, in the day, for the day, we're seeing 5%, 10% pickups, which is in some cases just doubling what we have on the books. Nothing more than 2 or 3 weeks out in most markets, maybe a little bit further in some of the resort markets, but in the urban markets, really nothing to speak of more than 2-3 weeks out. And so I think one of the interesting things that will come out of this is, we used to joke every year when we did budgets, which is a horrible process in hospitality, by the way, because they start in June when we barely know what's going on this year, and the process starts, and we go through 8 iterations before we finally get to budgets. And then that's halfway into the year of next year. But we always joked about zero-based budgeting, and people would say, oh yeah, we do zero-based budgeting. It's mostly BS at the end of the way. Well, guess what we're doing now? You close a hotel and you've laid just about everybody off but a skeleton team. We're doing zero-based budgeting. I mean, effectively, right? Every month, what do we need? If we got this level of demand, what people do we need to manage that business, given that our general manager can check people in? Yeah. Our director of sales, who's not busy enough, can make beds. People's roles have changed. We've gone back to our roots. It's a little like being in a B&B again. And when you're running at low occupancies, you're going to run the business differently.
Yeah.
And so I think what will come out of this, again, is going back to, and this happens in every cycle, let's relook at how we do everything. Does the customer care about that amenity? Are they willing to pay for it? If not, eliminate it. What do they care about? Let's add that at the end of the day. Do we need all this middle management? Is there assistance we can provide through technology or greater efficiency through new technologies? And these down cycles tend to create more efficient ways to run the business, which is really critical to get through these cycles and get to the other side and rehire your team really over the next few years of a recovery. But we will be running these businesses smarter and better when we come out of this. And the way we're running them now is completely different than the way we were running them before, because the level of leads is all different. The level of business is different. We don't need somebody to figure out how to cram as many groups as we can into meeting space, because there are no groups right now at the end of the day. And there's probably technology that's been developed that we can use to make that more efficient on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, I mean, the manning issue or the staffing issue, and also you mentioned a great example of a general manager taking in the guest. I mean, this is exactly how things have to work from now on. And there are times where general managers really were so distant from that little day-to-day that they didn't know how to do it. So, I mean, it's a great learning curve to go back to the basics of how things used to be. So I really like that feedback you are giving. Now, my final question is that you have hotels from East Coast to West Coast, and how are you dealing with the different regulations that are in the different legislations? Because there must be U.S. In Finland, it's very straightforward. It's only one country, but you have the different states, and they all have their own legislations. Just what are your thoughts on that? Maybe you can share some examples.
Sure. Well, interesting, as chair of AHLA, one of the things that we've been doing this year is we've been keeping a list of what all these regulations are in every individual state, and that resource is available online at the AHLA website for members. So, and it's free to be a member and join. So, as an individual, so great resource library there. The second thing is, as an industry, we pulled all of the senior leaders of all the major brands and operating companies and owners together, and said, let's create a high standard with the help of health officials, scientists, and the CDC, and create a program that effectively can be our stamp of approval for safety and cleanliness for our hotels, for both our associates and for our guests, and that's called Safe Stay. And we've created a certification and a training program for that for all properties to use. I think an employee can do it for $5 and go through and get the certification for Safe Stay. Now, some of the states have done that as well, like California through CHLA, their state association. And what we're trying to do is, frankly, fend off a lot of local regulation beyond just these executive orders, which provide, a more liberal guidance, if you will, that you can work within, because this is an evolving understanding of the virus and how it transfers from one person to another. And so your standards really need to be somewhat fluid at the end of the day. And we keep updating the Safe Stay standards. So it's a hard thing. We don't operate our hotels, and we have 18 different operators in our portfolio. And of course, each of them are monitoring their own local markets as well. But much of this has really been through executive order. Fortunately, not much through legislation. And that's what we're trying to keep from happening, because then it becomes much more static and probably less effective and appropriate against a virus that we keep learning more about every day.
Okay, thank you very much. And over to you, Abid.
Thank you, Sam. We were talking about earlier, John, about the changing dynamics, whether it's consumer behavior or not. I was reading Harris poll that Hotel Business published recently, and they said 58% of the leisure travelers are going to do sort of staycation rather than a long distance or a long haul vacation. Only about 63% of the people, 63% of the people don't feel comfortable flying or getting on a plane. And 74% of the business traveler said that to the extent that they can help it, they would augment with digital meetings as opposed to getting on a plane and going there. How do we gain consumer confidence? And for hotels, particularly where you have to get on a plane, we are reliant on airline industry. And unfortunately, misery might love a company, but airlines are worse off than we are.
Yeah, so it's a good question, Abid, and I think it's critical that people do feel comfortable through the entire journey, right? I mean, from leaving their house to going through a parking garage, or if they're taking Lyft or Uber, are they comfortable doing that? And going through the airport and getting on a plane and then doing the same thing on the other side. I've gotten very comfortable with Uber and Lyft over the years, but last time we went out to California a month ago, we rented a car for 17 days. And we wouldn't have done that otherwise if it hadn't been for the pandemic. And we feel more comfortable knowing that car is ours for 17 days. And we think it'll be sanitized when we get it, but we can sanitize it too for the parts of it that we use. I think that it's getting the message out. I mean, we've tried to promote a lot of PR as the brands have as well, with the safety of staying in a hotel. But I think the airlines, it took them a while, but I think they've, to some extent, gotten their stuff together, understanding that they need to create confidence as well. The fact that you need to wear a mask now, I mean, oh my God, like, it's such a big inconvenience to wear a mask. I don't get it. And the interesting thing about planes is, I mean, they do recirculate the air, I think it's every 30 seconds or something. And through filters, it's a pretty clean environment overall. So I think part of it is a perception that it's not safe. I haven't heard of there being a greater number of flight attendants who work on a plane daily getting the virus versus the common population at the end of the day. So I don't know that it is any more dangerous, but certainly people perceive it that way. And the airlines need to, and the airports need to work together the same way we're doing in the hospitality industry to create a set of standards that the guest will know is equal apart. I also think they need to recognize that, and this is perhaps competitive, but some are saying we're not going to book the middle seat, and others are saying, well, we're going to book it, but we're going to let you change your reservations, and we'll send you an email that says you can do that. And I think that's less effective at the end of the day.
I think education goes a long ways, and there is that perception. What I don't know is going to scare me. So it seems like Sam was talking about, that each state is doing their own thing, and each hotel is doing their own thing. So consumer is totally lost as to what is really necessary, what works and what doesn't work. Is there anything else from AHLA's point of view that hotel organization is doing, working with the likes of Uber and Lyft and airline industry and all in the touch points in that consumer travel journey, so that we can gain their confidence that it is being attended to?
Well, we've worked through U.S. Travel, which we're a part of, which involves all of those organizations that you mentioned, and certainly encourage them to do that. But at the end of the day, they've got to rally and do that together on their own, if you will, within their own industries. So I mean, we'll keep trying, but they do each have their standards, and unfortunately, I don't think the word's gotten out everywhere to make people feel comfortable. And look, everybody has a different level of risk taking they're willing to take, and I think it's fair to say at the end of the day, we're not going to see any level of normalcy until people feel comfortable that either they're not going to get it, or if they're going to get it, they're not going to end up in the hospital and maybe die or suffer long-term health consequences. So I think that one of those two need to be achieved for us to get back to some level of normalcy.
And I hope that happens sooner than later. Everybody is waiting for the vaccines to come out, and every day there is a little bit of an encouraging news. So hopefully that'll happen sooner than later. I'm going to change the topic to capital markets. Can you tell us your view as to what these capital markets look like? What's the availability of debt? Is it still inexpensive? Are banks willing to lend? And what does that whole environment look like?
Well, it's a pretty challenging environment if you need capital, particularly for an individual property. And there's no doubt, if you're a lender, that there's a risk out there you weren't thinking about that not only exists, but it's pretty catastrophic in terms of its impact on their underlying security. And so there's a lot of rethinking going on within the lending community. Some thinking, do I even want to be in the hotel lending business? I think a lot of those lenders today are really focused on dealing with their issues within their existing portfolios. And that's going to cause them to take their resources, move them to solve their problems, and away from making new capital available, other than for very strong relationships at the end of the day, and even those can get strained at this point. So I think as it relates to the capital markets, refinancing is pretty difficult, other than with your existing lender, who has no choice at the end of the day. And even mezzanine capital, helpful capital, is really struggling right now with their existing portfolios. There's plenty of capital available, but it's waiting for opportunities. And so it's not, I wouldn't necessarily call it particularly friendly and where it is friendly maybe on platform capital, i.e. to provide liquidity, it's going to be very expensive. It's looking for what we understand returns, that are clearly in the 15 to 20% plus range on their capital, and it's capital that needs to be prepared to take ownership as well, control the asset if necessary. So it's going to stymie the transaction markets for quite a while, the lack of capital. And when it is available, it's very expensive. So those days of those really low rates, you've seen new deals that get done even with good borrowers where LIBOR has been, floor has been set at 100 basis points as an example, and then they're flopping on a 500, 600 basis point LIBOR spread. And maybe some of it's PIK, payment in kind, and it accumulates, and then maybe there's a participation. So it's definitely gotten more expensive, and frankly, appropriately so, given the uncertainty right now.
That's pretty consistent with what a lot of the conversation has been. Low LTVs, high spreads, so it's going to be pretty expensive if somebody is out looking for debt. But that's a great segue into transactions. Obviously, transactions currently are not there. I wouldn't even know how to value an asset when there is no EBITDA, there is no cap rates, there's no comps. Any thoughts on that as to when the bid-ask spreads might close and when the transaction market might pick up?
So it's a complicated question with a multitude of answers. First, I'd say if you're a seller at the market, there's a market. You might not like the valuations, but there is a market, and that's important because that doesn't always exist, that there's actual liquidity out there and that they're buyers. There's a lot of capital available. So I do think if you need to sell and you're willing to sell at the market because maybe you need liquidity, you still have equity in your asset, you need carry costs for your other assets, you need to sell something that somebody would like to own, there's a market for it. It may be down, depends on the asset. It could be 20% for some of the better assets. It could be 30, 40% for other assets, but there is a market out there of buyers. If you don't need to sell, well, don't. It's not a good time. Buyers generally need to be buying with all equity. That means they do need to discount the pricing, the valuations even more at the end of the day. So, and I think from a timing perspective, because of the nature of this downturn being so different than others, right? If you go to the last cycle, and while assets went back to the CMBS bondholders through the special servicers, the assets oftentimes sat there for years. They earned fees on them. They were generating income. It wasn't a terrible thing for their bondholders, and it was a way for them to get the most return back on their investment. It's different today when you actually are putting dollars out to own an asset. It's burning money. Forget whether you're getting anything on your bonds or your debt. The assets are actually losing money and on an operating basis. And so somebody's got to feed that. Somebody's got to pay the real estate taxes. And I think, and so in some ways, I think this market has the potential to get created much quicker than last go round with more assets available than it did last time, because I don't think the CMBS owners are going to want to keep feeding these assets. I think they're going to want to get them out the door as quickly as they can. But they're also stifled by no staff. I mean, most of these special servicers had 2 people in their departments, and within 3 weeks they have 500 problem properties. And so that means they've got to staff up and hire people and get people to deal with these with these issues. There's plenty of capital, opportunistic capital, that's going to be out there, and whether it's buying notes or buying portfolios of debt, buying mezz pieces, buying loans, I think the capital will be there, but it's going to be looking for a pretty attractive return, given the continuing uncertainty we have in the industry.
And I think that this particular downturn is very different than any others, at least in our lifetime, and hopefully we won't experience one like this ever again.
Let's hope not.
Yeah, how do you prepare for something like this? Hopefully you don't, and hopefully you don't have to deal with it. Do you see more consolidation coming down the pike, whether it's with brands or owning entities or more merger and acquisitions?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things. One, but just back on your transaction question, it's probably prudent for me to mention. I mean, we actually are in the process of transacting a property where discussions began after the pandemic had already impacted the industry. The asset was already closed. We had a group with capital approach us and say, hey, we have a strategic reason to own this asset. We have other assets in this marketplace. We love your asset. It's very unique. It's our property in Nashville Union Station, which is a National Historic Landmark and a spectacular property. And we said, look, we don't need to sell anything. And so we did work out a price that we found attractive, where we can then take that capital and reallocate it elsewhere, where we think we'll get a better return over the next few years. And so again, that was not a distressed seller, and it was not somebody who needed to sell. It was, if there's a transaction here at a price we both find fair, we'll do the deal. And in that case, therefore, there was no buyer-seller gap in valuation in the transactions moving forward. I think to your question about consolidation, we've been going through consolidation, right? I mean, we've seen significant consolidation on the brand side. We're seeing it on the operator side. This will accelerate it, just like it's doing to a lot of trends. At the end of the day, it'll take what might have happened over a 3, 4, or 5 year period and probably accelerate it into a 1 or 2 or 3 year period. And so we would expect more consolidation in operators, in brands, in ownership, in the public company side as well. And I think it's also sometimes driven by the fact, and we've seen this in the restaurant business already, where we've had restaurateurs come back to us who have been in our properties, leased the properties, and said, here's the keys. We're done. We're out of the restaurant business. We don't see a path forward, anytime soon. And it's just no fun anymore. And so we're out of it. And it won't surprise me to see some of that happen in the public markets and in other areas of the business where people just say, look, this is a fun industry, but it's not fun now.
Well, any advice for the future leaders, for students that are just graduating from hotel programs and they see this industry decimated because of the virus? Any advice that you might share with them as to how they can prepare themselves for future?
You mean other than going into the technology business and staying away from the hotel business? Well, I'd say if they're really committed to the business, it could be a wonderful business. I mean, serving people, making people happy, the ability to be creative. I think that, again, we talked about this early on, that the people want to travel, right? I mean, this secular trend of experiences, as the socioeconomic averages climb and people have more disposable dollars that they can use on a discretionary basis, it's better to go out and travel than maybe collect bow ties, Sam, at the end of the day, and or whatever they're collecting, whether it's shoes or purses or suits or whatever, cars or whatever it might be. Go have an experience. And the internet has opened the world up to everybody to see it, right? But you're only seeing it one-dimensionally. You're not seeing it three-dimensionally at the end of the day. And even technology probably will help make it three-dimensional, but it's not the same at the end of the day. So my advice is it's a wonderful industry. We get through these cycles. It's highly cyclical. Understand there's going to be some big ups and downs. But it's a fun industry. People enjoy being in it. And if you enjoy people and you enjoy travel, it's a great business. Hang in there and learn, right? You learn the most when things are bad. You don't learn all that much when things are good, because frankly, almost anything works when things are good. When things are bad, you find out who's not wearing a bathing suit when the water goes out, right? And you were saying, what will it change? I mean, we have to relook at leverage again. What's the right amount of leverage? How do you maintain liquidity? Are lenders going to require you to maintain a certain level of liquidity? By the way, will lenders provide financing in the future without some pandemic insurance protection? You remember we went through this after 9/11, and you couldn't get financing without terrorism insurance, right? And so the national government had to create terrorism insurance, which we've been able to continue to renew over the years. Maybe that happens with pandemic insurance, which we're working on in Congress right now.
Yeah, I hope there are going to be other initiatives, I'm sure, coming down the pike that would help the industry, because it is a fantastic industry. Having spent a lot of time, for whatever reason, I don't remember why I ended up in this business, but it has been a fabulous business and really enjoyable. But there is no business in the world that comes without its challenges, and you can always learn from that. Jon, we approaching the end of our session. Sam, are there any other questions that you might have before I continue to go on?
No, please go ahead. I think I'm enjoying this, so I think just go ahead.
So, Jon, from leadership perspective, these times are very tough. Every story is a heart-wrenching story. From leadership perspective, any attributes that help leaders like yourselves and other industry leaders get through this time frame and get their organizations and team prepped up to get through these time frames?
Yeah, I mean they're the basic qualities. If you had good parents that have been impressed upon you over your years growing up, honesty, integrity, empathy. Those are really critical at the end of the day. Lead by example. It's such a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. It's really important. I think over communicate with people. Understand they don't know what you know. And don't assume that they even know the basics. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear mongering out there, right? We have nonstop media that's doing that. I mean, we're counting deaths on a screen every minute. I mean, what does that do? It creates fear at the end of the day. And so how do you bring people back to some level of pragmatism and sanity and comfort? And it's being honest and being transparent at the end of the day, and shared sacrifice and explaining that we are all in this together. I mean, again, another cliche, but it's true here. And I think the thing to me that's been the most encouraging thing, I mean, a lot of discouraging things. I don't know how we politicized wearing masks at the end of the day or why, but hopefully we get past that, and we are all in this together. And it is about protecting your colleague, your associate, your neighbor, your friend, your family. At the end of the day, what you do has an impact on them at the end of the day. So I think helping people understand that at the end of the day, a lot of people, this is their first crisis. It's their first down cycle. We've gone through these things. We sort of assume everybody's like us, but they're not, right? It's their first job. And so we have to really go back to basics at the end of the day and start from sort of the beginning and explain them. Here's what's happened. Here's what we're doing. Here's what you can do. Here's how you should do it. Here's how you should think about it. Here are the issues that you're going to have at your properties or with the people that you deal with. Understand those issues at the end of the day.
You know, I had a colleague of mine that I worked with. His saying was the move from implied to implicit. Don't take anything for granted. Whether you think they know or don't, make sure that you articulate it at a level that is simple and everybody can understand. So to wrap it up, Jon, any feel-good stories that you might have seen from AHLA point of view, any initiatives that AHLA has launched that is helping the industry that you would like to highlight here? Or for that matter, anything personal that you might have found out about yourself during this lockdown?
So two things I'd bring up. One is I do think that this industry has it's been brought together by the leaders of this industry, and AHLA today I think is nothing like what it was 5 or 10 years ago. It is powerful. It is an incredible resource that people should tap into. I think we don't take credit for this, but two programs that I think have really helped our industry that we were part of the advocacy for. One was, of course, the benefits for employees who get laid off. Senator Schumer called them unemployment insurance on steroids. And in fact, is a little bit problematic because we have plenty of folks in our industry, being that we're below the overall average of wages in total, particularly the people who can't work from home, right? They work in the hotel and it's closed. But the fact that they make more money today than they did when they were working, I think it's an incredible program. It's going to help them when they get less than what they were making before, either on standard unemployment or whatever the next phase of this legislation is. But I think that's been incredibly helpful in mitigating certainly the near-term impact on millions of people in our industry who've been laid off. The second thing is the PPP program, which being able to designate each individual property as a small business. So for folks who own 5 hotels or 8 hotels, small business owners, and therefore wouldn't have been considered a small business, can look at this and say, okay, each one of these is a small business. I can apply for a program for each one of these, and then I can pay employees and I can pay some of my expenses. I think we'd love to see an extension of that as part of this new legislation, and think there will be an extension, and it will be more targeted towards industries that have been impacted like ours, right? And I think on the personal side, well, first I'm incredibly enthusiastic and overjoyed about how the world has come together to find a cure for this in unbelievably quick, rapid time. And it certainly is encouraging that we're going to find one on something we've never found a vaccine for historically. I find that very encouraging as a human being. I'd love to see us come together on more issues than just the fatal issue at the end of the day. But the second thing is, you can sit at home and be scared and look, everybody has to run their life the way they're comfortable, and I don't want to have anybody cross a line. But I went on a trip for 17 days, stayed in 5 hotels, did all the traveling you talked about. I felt very comfortable. In fact, more comfortable than going into the grocery store at the end of the day. And of course, that could be, I don't like to shop, but and I never feel comfortable in a grocery store, but because I'll buy all the wrong stuff anyway, because I buy all the stuff I really like, which I shouldn't eat. But really, take a risk if you're comfortable. Go out and see what the world's like. Don't just listen to webinars and conferences and talking heads or CNN or Fox on the radio at the end of the day, because it'll skew your view of what's going on in the world.
Well, that is fantastic. Thank you so much, Jon. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for sharing all the insight. This has been a terrific session. Even though it is a webinar, I hope more people would listen to it, because there is a lot of great information that has come out of it. So thanks for spending the time with us. Over to you, Sam.
Yes, Jon, thank you very much. It has been really a lot of insight, a lot of value, and we have several live viewers. I think they were just at awe of what you had to say, so they were not even typing in any questions this time. But I'd like to thank all the live viewers who were watching us on LinkedIn Live, on Twitter, and also on YouTube. And also, once you are looking at us replay viewers, I want also, on behalf of Abid and myself, thank you very much for joining us today. And we'll be having soon another episode, and look forward to seeing you again. And I wish Jon have a great summer and a great continuation of the year.
Well, thank you, Sam. Thanks, Abid, and thanks for letting me spend some time with you and your viewers.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My pleasure.